In the golden halls of Buckingham Palace, where every gesture carries the weight of centuries and every glance is measured by protocol, a single raised hand would shatter the careful balance of royal life forever. What began as a quiet family gathering would become the moment when duty clashed with blood, when ancient traditions met modern defiance, and when one man's split-second decision would echo through the corridors of power for generations to come. This is the true story of how a royal guard's instinctive protection of young Princess Charlotte against an unexpected threat from within the royal family itself would expose secrets, challenge loyalties, and force the monarchy to confront a crisis that no amount of royal training could have prepared them for. Sometimes the greatest dangers come not from outside the palace walls, but from those who walk its sacred halls with crowns upon their heads. The afternoon sun filtered through the massive windows of the white drawing room as the royal family gathered for what was meant to be a quiet Sunday tea. Princess Charlotte, now 12 years old and growing more confident in her royal duties, sat beside her grandmother Queen Camilla at the ornate mahogany table. Her bright eyes sparkled with the same mischievous intelligence that had made her a favorite among both the palace staff and the British public. Sergeant James Morrison stood at attention near the doorway, his trained gaze sweeping the room with practiced efficiency. At 35, he had served the royal family for 8 years, earning their trust through his unwavering dedication and sharp instincts. His presence had become so familiar that the family barely noticed him anymore, which was exactly how he preferred it. In his line of work, invisibility meant he was doing his job correctly. The conversation around the tea table flowed easily between discussions of Charlotte's recent piano recital and plans for the upcoming state dinner. King Charles sat at the head of the table, occasionally interjecting with gentle humor that made his granddaughter giggle. Prince William and Catherine exchanged knowing glances as Charlotte regaled them with stories from her riding lessons, her animated gestures nearly knocking over her teacup more than once. Morrison noticed everything. The way Charlotte's eyes lit up when discussing her favorite horse, Moonbeam. How Queen Camilla's smile seemed slightly forced as she listened to the child's enthusiastic chatter. The subtle tension in Prince William's shoulders whenever his stepmother spoke directly to his daughter. These small details were his job to observe and file away, though he rarely needed to act on them during such peaceful family moments. As the afternoon wore on, Morrison detected a shift in the atmosphere. Queen Camilla's responses to Charlotte became shorter, more clipped. When Charlotte accidentally spilled a drop of tea on the pristine white tablecloth, Camilla's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but Morrison had been trained to read microexpressions and body language like a book. Charlotte, oblivious to the growing tension, continued her animated storytelling. She had just begun describing her plans for a charity project at school when Queen Camilla suddenly set down her teacup with enough force to make the delicate china rattle. "Charlotte," Camilla said, her voice carrying an edge that made everyone at the table look up. "Perhaps you could show a little more consideration for others when you speak." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Charlotte's bright expression faltered, confusion replacing her earlier joy. Prince William straightened in his chair, and Catherine reached protectively toward her daughter, though she stopped short of actually touching her. "I'm sorry, Grandmother Camilla," Charlotte said quietly, her voice small and uncertain. "I didn't mean to be inconsiderate." But Camilla wasn't finished. Her face had taken on a cold expression that Morrison had seen before, usually directed at palace staff who had displeased her. "You interrupt constantly, you make a mess, and you act as though the world revolves around your every whim. This behavior is unbecoming of a future member of the royal family." The silence that followed was deafening. King Charles shifted uncomfortably, his weathered hands gripping his teacup. Prince William's face had gone pale, then flushed with barely controlled anger. Catherine looked as though she might physically shield her daughter from any further verbal assault. Morrison felt his muscles tense, every instinct telling him that this situation was escalating beyond normal family disagreement. In his years of service, he had witnessed royal arguments before, but something about this felt different. Dangerous, even. Charlotte's lower lip began to tremble, but she lifted her chin with a dignity far beyond her 12 years. "I understand, Your Majesty. I'll try to do better." Her formal address to her step-grandmother, using the royal title instead of the familial one, seemed to inflame Camilla further. Morrison watched as the queen consort's hands began to shake slightly, her breathing becoming more shallow and rapid. These were warning signs he recognized from his training and threat assessment, though he'd never expected to see them displayed by a member of the royal family. "Don't you dare use that tone with me," Camilla said, her voice rising. "You think you're so special, don't you? So precious and perfect, just like your mother thinks she is." The attack on Catherine was the final straw for Prince William, who stood so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the polished floor. "That's quite enough," he said, his voice deadly calm in the way that Morrison had learned meant the prince was absolutely furious. "I won't have you speaking to my wife or my daughter in that manner." Camilla rose to meet his challenge, her eyes flashing with an anger that seemed disproportionate to anything that had actually occurred. "Your daughter needs to learn respect, William. Someone has to teach her, since you and Catherine clearly aren't doing your job as parents." Morrison's hand moved instinctively closer to his radio. The situation was spiraling out of control, and he could see that Charlotte was fighting back tears while trying to maintain her composure. The little princess who had been laughing and chattering just minutes ago now sat frozen in her chair, caught between the adults whose anger seemed to be growing by the second. King Charles finally found his voice. "Camilla, perhaps we should all take a moment to calm down. This is neither the time nor the place for such a discussion." But his wife ignored him completely, her focus entirely on William and his family. Morrison had seen this type of tunnel vision before, usually in people who were about to do something they would later regret. His body tensed further as he prepared to respond to whatever might come next. Catherine stood slowly, placing herself slightly in front of Charlotte's chair. "William is right," she said with icy politeness. "This conversation ends now. Charlotte has done nothing to deserve this treatment." The protection of her mother seemed to be the last thing Camilla could tolerate. Her face contorted with rage, and Morrison saw her hands clench in a fist at her sides. In that moment, he realized that what he was witnessing wasn't just a family argument. This was something much more serious, something that threatened the safety of the child he was sworn to protect. As Camilla took a step toward Charlotte, Morrison began moving forward, his training overriding everything else. He had sworn an oath to protect the royal family, and that oath extended to protecting them from threats both external and internal, even if that threat came from within their own ranks. The tension in the room reached a breaking point as Morrison positioned himself where he could intervene if necessary. Charlotte remained in her chair, her small hands folded in her lap, trying desperately to be invisible while the adults fought around her. The sight of her distress only strengthened Morrison's resolve to do whatever might be necessary to ensure her safety. What happened next would change everything for the royal family, and Morrison knew that his actions in the coming moments would define not just his career, but potentially the future of the monarchy itself. As he watched Camilla's rage continue to build, he prepared himself for a confrontation that no amount of royal protocol had ever prepared him to handle. The air in the white drawing room crackled with tension as Queen Camilla's anger reached a dangerous peak. Morrison watched her every movement, his years of training allowing him to read the subtle signs that preceded violent action. Her breathing had become rapid and shallow, her pupils dilated, and her hands trembled with barely contained rage. Most concerning was the way her focus had narrowed entirely to Charlotte, as if the 12-year-old had become the sole target of years of accumulated frustration. Charlotte remained seated, her back straight despite the fear Morrison could see in her eyes. The young princess had been raised with the same steel spine that characterized her father and grandfather, but she was still just a child facing an adult whose behavior had become unpredictable and threatening. Look at her, Camilla said, her voice rising to a pitch that made several family members wince. Sitting there like some sort of perfect little angel. You all act as though she can do no wrong, as though she's somehow more special than anyone else in this family. Catherine moved closer to her daughter, but Morrison could see that her position wouldn't be enough to fully shield Charlotte if Camilla decided to act on her anger. Prince William stood frozen, clearly torn between his desire to protect his family and his ingrained respect for royal hierarchy. King Charles appeared to be in shock, his face pale as he watched his wife's behavior spiral completely out of control. Morrison made a calculated decision to move closer to Charlotte's chair, positioning himself at an angle that would allow him to intercede quickly if necessary. His movement was smooth and professional, designed not to escalate the situation while ensuring he could fulfill his primary duty of protecting the young princess. She needs to understand that she's not the center of the universe, Camilla continued, her voice growing more shrill with each word. Someone needs to teach her humility, to show her what happens when spoiled children think they're untouchable. The threat in those words was unmistakable, and Morrison felt his body shift into a state of high alert. He had protected world leaders through assassination attempts and terrorist threats, but he had never faced a situation quite like this one. The danger came from within the very family he was sworn to protect, creating a complex dynamic that no training manual had ever addressed. Charlotte finally spoke, her voice steady despite the fear Morrison could see in her posture. "I'm sorry if I've upset you, Grandmother Camilla. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." Her calm dignity in the face of such hostility seemed to enrage Camilla even further. "Stop calling me that," she snapped. "Stop pretending you have any real affection for me. We both know you tolerate me because you have to, just like everyone else in this family." The raw pain and anger in Camilla's voice revealed layers of resentment that had apparently been building for years. Morrison began to understand that this outburst wasn't really about Charlotte's behavior at all. The young princess had simply become a convenient target for much deeper frustrations and insecurities. Prince William took a step forward, his own anger now matching his stepmother's intensity. "That's enough. I won't stand here and watch you terrorize my daughter because of your own issues." His words hit Camilla like a physical blow, and Morrison saw her face contort with rage. She turned toward William, but her gaze kept sliding back to Charlotte, as if the child had become a symbol of everything she felt had been denied to her in the royal family. "Your daughter," Camilla repeated, her voice dripping with venom. "Your precious little daughter who gets everything handed to her on a silver platter. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch everyone fawn over her while treating me like an outsider in my own home?" Morrison recognized the dangerous shift in her body language. Camilla's weight had moved to the balls of her feet, her muscles coiled as if preparing for action. Her hands had moved from clenched fists to an open position that could easily become a striking pose. Every alarm bell in his professional training was now screaming warnings. Catherine seemed to sense the escalation as well, moving to place her arm around Charlotte's shoulders. "Charles," she said urgently to the king, "you need to stop this now." But Charles appeared to be paralyzed by the unprecedented nature of the situation. Morrison realized that the king had probably never seen his wife behave this way, and the shock was preventing him from taking action to de-escalate the confrontation. Charlotte remained remarkably composed, though Morrison could see the strain it was taking for her to maintain her dignity. "Maybe I should go to my room," she said quietly, starting to rise from her chair. "Sit down," Camilla commanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You don't get to run away from this conversation." The direct order, delivered with such hostility, finally galvanized Prince William into action. "Don't you dare speak to her that way," he said, moving around the table toward his daughter. "Charlotte, come here." But Camilla stepped into his path, blocking his access to his child. Morrison's muscles tensed as he recognized the classic positioning of someone preparing to become physically aggressive. His hand moved closer to his radio, though he hesitated to call for backup that might escalate an already volatile situation. "She stays right where she is," Camilla said, her voice now carrying an authoritative tone that had never been directed at Charlotte before. "It's time someone taught her that actions have consequences." Morrison felt time slow down as he watched Camilla turn back toward Charlotte. The young princess sat frozen in her chair, her composure finally beginning to crack as she realized that the adults who should have been protecting her were instead engaged in a battle she didn't understand. King Charles finally found his voice. "Camilla, stop this immediately. You're frightening the child." "Good," Camilla replied without taking her eyes off Charlotte. "Perhaps a little fear will teach her some respect." Morrison saw Catherine's face go pale with shock and anger, while William looked as though he might physically intervene despite the chaos it would cause. The situation had moved far beyond a simple family disagreement and was now approaching something that could have lasting consequences for everyone involved. As Camilla took another step towards Charlotte, Morrison made a decision that would change the course of his career and potentially alter the dynamics of the royal family forever. His sworn duty was clear: protect the members of the royal family from all threats, regardless of their source, even if that threat came from within the family itself. Charlotte looked up at Morrison with eyes that held a mixture of fear and trust, and in that moment he knew that whatever happened next, he would have no regrets about the choice he was about to make. Some lines could not be crossed, even by royalty, and the protection of an innocent child took precedence over every other consideration. Morrison stepped forward, placing himself between Camilla and Charlotte just as the queen consort raised her hand in what was unmistakably a threatening gesture. The movement was swift and decisive, born from years of training and an unshakable commitment to his duty. "Your Majesty," he said quietly but firmly, "I need you to step back." The room fell into absolute silence as everyone processed what had just happened. A royal protection officer had just intervened in a family dispute, positioning himself against a member of the very family he was sworn to protect. It was unprecedented, potentially career-ending, and absolutely necessary. Camilla stared at him in shock, her raised hand frozen in midair as she realized that her path to Charlotte was now blocked by someone who would not be intimidated or dismissed. Morrison met her gaze steadily, his professional calm intact despite the magnitude of what he had just done. Behind him, he could hear Charlotte's quiet sob of relief, and he knew that whatever consequences he might face, his choice had been the right one. The silence that followed Morrison's intervention stretched for what felt like an eternity. Camilla stood frozen with her hand still raised, her face cycling through expressions of shock, rage, and disbelief as she processed what had just occurred. A mere protection officer had dared to insert himself between her and Charlotte, effectively challenging her authority within her own home. Morrison remained perfectly still, his body positioned protectively between the queen consort and the young princess. His calm professionalism stood in stark contrast to the chaos of emotions swirling around the room. Behind him, he could hear Charlotte's quiet breathing and the rustle of fabric as Catherine moved closer to her daughter. King Charles was the first to break the silence, his voice hoarse with shock. "Morrison, what do you think you're doing?" Morrison turned slightly, keeping Camilla in his peripheral vision while addressing the king. "Your Majesty, my sworn duty is to protect all members of the royal family from any threat to their safety or well-being. I judge Princess Charlotte to be in immediate danger." The words hung heavy in the air, their implications clear to everyone present. Morrison had just officially declared that he considered Queen Camilla to be a threat to Charlotte's safety. It was an accusation that could destroy careers, end marriages, and create a constitutional crisis. Camilla finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "How dare you? I am the Queen Consort of England, and you're nothing but hired help. Stand aside immediately." Morrison didn't move. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but I cannot comply with that request while I believe Princess Charlotte remains in danger." Prince William stepped forward, his face reflecting a mixture of gratitude and concern. He understood better than anyone the professional suicide Morrison had just committed, but he also recognized that someone had finally put Charlotte's safety above royal protocol. "Morrison," William said quietly, "I appreciate your dedication, but perhaps we can resolve this without further confrontation." Morrison nodded respectfully, but maintained his position. "Of course, Your Royal Highness. However, I must insist that Princess Charlotte be removed from this situation before I stand down." Catherine had already begun helping Charlotte from her chair, her arms wrapped protectively around her daughter. The young princess looked pale and shaken, but her natural resilience was already beginning to reassert itself. As they moved toward the door, Charlotte paused and looked back at Morrison. "Thank you," she said simply, her young voice carrying a gravity that spoke to experiences no 12-year-old should have to endure. Morrison gave her a slight nod, his professional mask slipping just enough to show genuine warmth. "You're very welcome, Your Royal Highness." As Catherine and Charlotte left the room, the dynamics shifted once again. Camilla's rage, no longer focused on her target, seemed to deflate slightly, leaving behind something that looked uncomfortably like shame. King Charles moved to his wife's side, his own confusion evident as he tried to process what had just transpired. Morrison finally stepped aside, but he remained alert and ready to act if the situation escalated again. His career was almost certainly over, but he felt no regret about the choice he had made. Some principles were worth more than job security. Prince William approached Morrison with an expression of deep respect. "Sergeant Morrison, I want you to know that what you just did took extraordinary courage. Charlotte's safety should always be the priority, regardless of other considerations." The implicit criticism of his stepmother wasn't lost on King Charles, whose face darkened with the realization that his own inaction had forced a protection officer to make an impossible choice. "William, I think we all need to take a step back and examine what just happened here." Camilla finally lowered her hand, the gesture that had started everything now seeming pathetic and small. She looked around the room as if seeing it clearly for the first time, her eyes widening as the magnitude of her behavior became apparent. I don't know what came over me," she said, her voice small and broken. "I would never actually hurt Charlotte. I love that child." Morrison remained diplomatically silent, though his professional assessment was that Camilla's behavior had indeed posed a genuine threat to Charlotte's well-being. The psychological pressure she had applied, combined with her threatening posture and raised hand, had created a situation where intervention was not just appropriate, but necessary. King Charles looked haggard as he struggled to understand how his wife had reached such a breaking point. "Camilla, you've been under tremendous stress lately. Perhaps we should discuss getting you some support, some help in managing these feelings." The suggestion that she might need professional help seemed to bring Camilla back to herself somewhat. She straightened her shoulders and regained some of her composure, though the damage had already been done. Everyone in the room had seen behind the mask of royal dignity to something much more troubling. "I don't need help," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "I just need my family to show me the same respect they show everyone else." Prince William's jaw tightened at the suggestion that respect hadn't been shown, but he managed to keep his response measured. "Respect is earned, Camilla, and it's certainly not earned by terrorizing children." Morrison observed the exchange with professional detachment, though privately he agreed with Prince William's assessment. The hierarchy and deference that typically governed royal interactions had protected Camilla's behavior for too long, allowing resentments and inappropriate conduct to fester beneath the surface. King Charles looked defeated as he realized that this incident couldn't simply be swept under the rug like so many other family tensions had been in the past. "I think it would be best if we all took some time to cool down. Morrison, I'd like to speak with you privately later about today's events." Morrison nodded acknowledgement, understanding that his future with the Royal Protection Service would likely be decided in that conversation. He had acted according to his training and his conscience, but Challenging the queen consort would have consequences regardless of the justification. As the room began to empty, Morrison remained behind to ensure that no further incidents occurred. He watched as Camilla and Charles left together, the king's arm around his wife's shoulders in a gesture that seemed more supportive than affectionate. The marriage that had weathered so many public storms was now facing a private crisis that threatened its very foundation. Later that evening, Morrison found himself in King Charles's private study, facing the man he had served faithfully for nearly a decade. The king looked older than his years, the weight of the day's events having taken a visible toll. "Morrison," Charles began, his voice heavy with exhaustion, "what you did today was unprecedented. You essentially declare my wife to be a threat to my granddaughter's safety." Morrison stood at attention, prepared for whatever judgment might come. "Yes, Your Majesty. In my professional opinion, Princess Charlotte was in immediate danger, and I acted accordingly." Charles studied him for a long moment. "You've served this family with distinction for 8 years. Your record is exemplary, your dedication beyond question. But you must understand that today's actions have put us all in an impossible position." "I understand, Your Majesty. I'm prepared to accept the consequences of my actions." The king sighed deeply, looking every bit his age and more. "The consequences, Morrison, may extend far beyond your career. What happened today will require careful management to prevent it from becoming a constitutional crisis." Morrison nodded, understanding the broader implications of what had occurred. A protection officer challenging a senior royal could not become public knowledge without seriously damaging the monarchy's carefully maintained image. However, Charles continued, surprising Morrison, "I cannot fault your judgment. Watching the security footage afterward, it's clear that Charlotte was genuinely distressed and that Camilla's behavior was concerning. You did what you believed necessary to protect a child, and for that, I cannot condemn you." The king's admission that he had reviewed security footage suggested that the incident was being taken very seriously indeed. Morrison felt a mixture of relief and apprehension about what might come next. "What I can tell you," Charles said finally, "is that changes will be made. Camilla will be receiving professional support to address whatever issues led to today's behavior. There will be new protocols in place for family gatherings. And Charlotte will never again be put in a position where she requires protection from members of her own family." Morrison felt the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. While his future remained uncertain, it appeared that the primary goal had been achieved. Charlotte's safety would be ensured. "As for your position," the king continued, "I'm told by security that reassigning you would raise questions we're not prepared to answer. You'll remain with the family, but with a specific mandate to prioritize the safety and well-being of the children above all other considerations, including royal protocol." The unexpected reprieve left Morrison momentarily speechless. He had been prepared for dismissal, possibly even legal action, yet instead he was being given expanded authority to protect the very people he had sworn to serve. "Thank you, Your Majesty," he managed to say. "I won't let you down." Charles nodded slowly. "I know you won't, Morrison. Today proved that your loyalty lies where it should, with the innocent and vulnerable members of this family who depend on us to keep them safe." As Morrison left the king's study, he reflected on the events that had changed everything in the space of a few hours. A family tea had become a crisis that exposed deep fractures within the royal family. But it had also demonstrated that some principles were worth defending regardless of the cost. The next morning, Princess Charlotte smiled and waved at Morrison as she passed him in the corridor on her way to breakfast. The trust in her eyes told him everything he needed to know about whether his choices had been correct. Some duties transcended protocol, and protecting that trust would always be worth whatever consequences might follow.